Hi, I'm Matt Goodall. I work for the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust in Wales. We're out here today on Nghymru farm near Trefnant in Denbighshire to look at the EIP project, the Welsh Farmland Bird Initiative.
Hi, I'm Ant Griffith. We are farming about 1,200 acres organically, spring calving, and I farm that in conjunction contract farming with Rhodri Ellis, and we're currently hoping to milk, as in February, about 950 cows.
So the aim of the project is to look at reversing the farmland biodiversity declines that we've got across Wales and the rest of the UK, and especially so with farmland birds. So with the cover crops and the supplementary feeding, we've done research into this, and we know that this is one way of helping birds survive through the winter. It's very simple. In the same way that people feed birds in their gardens, what we're doing here is we're providing really good habitat, so protection from the elements, so the wind and the rain through the winter. These crops are a bit warmer, so there's lots of overwintering insects in there, and they're also providing seeds. So you can see here there's a whole host of different species within here. There's things like kale and utopia to provide the leafy green and the warmth, so that's not providing any seed. But then you've got things like oil radish, there's gold of pleasure in there, and there's mustard in there, and all of those are providing lots and lots of seed. So this whole field here, which is about a hectare in size, so about 2.4 acres, and we've got a field adjacent to us as well, is providing so much good in one area, and by doing that and with the supplementary feeding as well, we're making sure that these birds are surviving the winter better, but they're also going into the breeding season in better condition, so the right weight, so they're more likely to be successful when they're breeding. And if you can do this for a number of years ongoing, you can actually build your populations. So we've demonstrated this in the past. It's not just about halting or stopping that decline, you can actually reverse it too. And back when we developed this on another demonstration farm, which is the GWCT's Allerton project, we started this back in 1992, and they said it had taken decades to get that to that point of decline, and it would take decades to get it back up to where it was, and we basically, over 10 years, we more than doubled those bird numbers and got it back up to 1960s levels. But the interesting thing with that was that in the first couple of years of that actually most of the gains were done in the first couple of years. So by doing this continuously for a number of years, you can really make a difference to your local populations. So, Ant, why is it that you've wanted to get involved in this project?
I've been involved in a whole host of schemes right from the start, from Glas Tir to Tir Gofal, so I've always been involved in these, and you know, biodiversity has been a sort of important part of, I think, probably feeling to be a custodian of the land, you know, and that's all part of it. We need to manage everything. It's a real concern, I think, across Wales. You know, we've seen increasingly sort of industrialisation of the countryside, and these schemes are an absolute lifeblood, I think, to biodiversity. And we, as everywhere gets continually sort of grazed out, and unless it's properly funded, there's less and less places where there's decent habitat, and I think that's probably the cause of the biodiversity crash.
Through this, I mean, you've got kind of 3 of these plots on this farm here, haven't you? But even if every farm across Wales had like 1 of these plots on their farm, what a massive difference that would make. You've seen, stood here chatting, there's been chaffinches and linnets, mixed flock kind of flitting in and out and using this. Really obvious when you get here of the difference it makes compared to the walk here through just normal pasture fields, and obviously it's really essential that we've got those pasture fields and we've got livestock farming in Wales, but we're aware of these biodiversity declines, and we've got to try and fit in this biodiversity alongside the farming. And I've not yet met a farmer who hasn't said, well, if it's paid right, I'll do it. So on the payment side of things, it's a responsibility of this project really to show the realistic costings, because within Glastir, and only kind of less than 1 in 5 farms were in Glastir anyway, but actually within Glastir, the take-up of this as a cover crop as an option was kind of really kind of minimal. And this is such an important thing that we've got to get right, because doing something like this does so much good in one space, and it's a really efficient way of delivering an awful lot of good and biodiversity. So this crop is going to be in for 2 years. It's going to be full of kind of flowers and insects through the spring and summer next year, as well as seed the following year. Now in Glastir, you could only have, it had to be 80% cereal, so to me that's an annual crop. So you've got to re-establish it every year. You miss out on all the good in the spring and the summer between time as well. So one of the things I think has been driving the decline in farmland birds, in Wales particularly, is the loss of mixed farming. If you look over in England, and specifically like southern eastern England, a lot of the drivers in declines in wildlife there have been from the intensification of arable. But I think in Wales what we've lost is any arable. It's something like between 10 and 15% arable in Wales now. So we've got an awful lot of pasture, but there's hardly any seed with that.
But also the pasture is completely grazed out, and there's absolutely no, there's no habitat areas at all. And if you drive across large sections of Wales, I mean it is as bald as a billiard ball.
So it's no wonder really why all of our kind of farmland seed-eating birds we're seeing these huge declines in, and it's year on year. And a lot of this, I mean, people will see kind of the birds about, and then it gets to winter and they think, oh, they've all just disappeared off the site, they've gone elsewhere, but a lot of them have just died, and that's the straight truth of it. And that kind of annual winter mortality is driving these declines. So if we can bring in something like this, which is just full of seed, that's going to help feed the birds through the winter. When this crop, because the seed on this crop will become diminished, it won't last forever. When that's starting to go, that's when the supplementary feeding in the buckets really kicks in, because the birds are used to coming to the area and using the area. They're not finding the seed in the crop that they used to, although we've still got this fantastic habitat. So then they're switching to the buckets and using the seed from there. And as I was saying a minute ago, we've got chaffinches here, we've got linnets here, you've had yellowhammers on the farm in the past. I've seen reed buntings here, greenfinches here. So all these kind of seed-eating species are really going to benefit from this. And then we were talking before about the overwintering insects within the crop, because it's a bit warmer. So song thrushes, blackbirds, things like that are going to love this as well. It's ticking lots and lots of boxes for lots of species. And then if you've got a 2-year crop like this kale will flower next year, and that'll be full of pollinators and also full of lots of other insects again. So we're getting those birds in really good condition for the breeding season, and then we're providing them with what's called an insect-rich habitat, which is full of the insects which they need to feed their chicks, because that's full of protein, and those chicks can then hopefully get away better, survive better as well. So it's all of those benefits in one area. And even when we came after this has been drilled and we were having a look at it establishing, I came to have a look, and it was just full of butterflies even at that stage. And you look at the stark difference between that and the field next to it, we're then providing for pollinators too. So it's everything all together in one small area.
I mean, the other thing that I think is kind of important is the interconnectivity. If that's why I'd like to see that rolled out, because you've just got our little piece here does so much, but if you've actually got interconnecting sites,
100%.
over a much bigger area, that makes a huge difference.
So your area will probably influence the bird populations within, say, half a kilometre radius of the plots themselves, and you've got 3 of them dotted across the farm. And like you said, if we've got that at a landscape scale, then all of a sudden they start connecting up and we can raise a whole population across Wales, would be the overall aim. So this is one of our supplementary feeding buckets, so farmland feeder, and this is what I was talking about before. So within the crop itself, I mean, this is one that hasn't been eaten. I was pulling them off before, but I mean, this is from oil radish, and you can see there that it's got all these little seeds in there, and the gold of pleasure again next to it. But eventually, these seeds will get eaten by the birds dotting around and coming into the crop. So this is where the supplementary feeding really comes into place then. And this is full of things like this. It's got wheat in there, which will help feed yellowhammers, but it's got things in there like black sunflowers and sunflower hearts, and linseed in there, and millet, and those kind of things. So similar in a way to what you'd get in a bird mix in your garden. You can see there's kind of these 5 ports, so enough for 5 birds to get around and go to. The reason we've put it here is because the birds can get in and out of the crop, so there's a bit of cover here, but there's also this big hedgerow coming down here, so there's cover for the birds to get away to and hide into if they want to, which means they're much more comfortable kind of getting to this feeder and getting back away. So that's a really important where you site this. Again, it's kind of about 1 metre off the ground, and although there are some species like blackbirds, for example, and some robins sometimes don't like going on perches to feed, but what happens then is that the smaller birds can be really picky, so they'll pick out the seed from these and just chuck it over their shoulder, and then things like blackbirds will then pick it up off the floor then. So you're doing a kind of an all-round job doing this. You can also get ones that have an automatic kind of spinner feeder on them, and just you can set them to kind of chuck out food twice a day. So depending on where you are, because a lot of birds do like to eat off the ground, but here it wouldn't really be right because it's a bit wet here. So if you had a bit of hard standing or a track nearby, you could do that kind of thing, and the birds quite quickly get used to the time when the feed's delivered. Or what I've said to Ant as well is every time he comes and fills this up, to just chuck a bit around. We've started doing this on the 1st of December, and that will go all the way through to the end of April, and most of the time into May as well, depending on the seasons, and that's called the hungry gap. So again, kind of thinking about what's out there at this time of year in our farmland habitats, there's very little seed around, so it's designed really to fill that hungry gap and make sure there's food for them. And as I said before, the birds then are full, they go into the breeding season in better condition, and this is something that any farm can do, and it doesn't take any kind of change to your farming practices, so we'd really like to encourage a lot more of this. But the bucket on its own does a bit, but actually having it with this crop behind it does an awful lot more. If we were to just put the bucket here, we'd probably be feeding the birds up and down this hedgerow and maybe up and down this one, and not much further really, because at the end of the day it's just a green bucket and it's not that obvious what it's for. But when you draw all the birds into a big crop like this, and they start becoming familiar with the crop and then start to use a feeder as well, that's where the benefit comes from. So ideally we'd like to see it combined, so we've got a supplementary feeder with a cover crop, and it's kind of every box ticked then.
So here we've got so it's on 3 fields, it's about just under 8 acres that we've got in cover crop, and we've got 4 feeders. It's my job obviously to fill the things. It's not it's quite important where you site it, because obviously you don't want to have to be carrying seed too far, and make it as easy for yourself as possible, but it's just not that onerous a job to do. And actually just to spend a little bit of time when you're feeding, bringing down some feed, I mean, you do then just have a moment to actually look around and see what you've got on your plot, and so that's all as a bit of a bonus really. You can try and identify what species you've actually got here. I mean, when we came down this morning, there were flocks of, I mean, probably 7 or 8 species that we could see here, but there was a large amount of activity, which is kind of quite gratifying. You know, it actually shows that something's going right here.
But it's also, I mean, a lot of the flocks that we see in the mixed, kind of mixed species flocks, so finches and that kind of stuff. So you've got the chaffinches there, there's goldfinches within there. Most of them were actually linnets, which are red listed, which was quite a nice thing for you to see, I think. So you're doing a really good job with this, but then the feeder itself as well, that's going to be feeding all the ones that people will think, well, you know, we've got plenty of, so things like blue tits or house sparrows or chaffinches. But again, just as a chaffinch as an example, it's very soon going to become amber listed because it's declining rapidly. And our green finches are amber listed at the minute, very soon probably going to become red listed because again, they're declining rapidly. So I'd say that every farmland bird really, and all these kind of seed-eating birds, they all need help. So whether we think, well, we've got quite a few of them or not, if we look at the kind of the graphs where it shows the declines of kind of the average decline, bringing all the species together, everything really is dropping. There are a few odd cases where birds are bucking the trend. So I mentioned goldfinches before, they seem to be doing incredibly well. But apart from those, I mean, most other things are declining. So anything that we can do to help that is going to be beneficial.